What's up, YouTube? Back for another video. This time it's going to be part 2 of my most meaningful albums. So yeah, let's jump right into it. Here's what we're listening to in the background. One that I talked about in the last video, Creator Gods of Violence. Love it, love it, love it. Check it out, guys. It's their most recent album, 2017. So, yeah, like I said in the last video, this one's going to be mostly extreme metal that I'm going to talk about. And actually, it's all extreme metal. And the first album I'm going to show is kind of the band where kind of that kind of got it all started, you know, as far as getting into extreme metal. And that band is In Flames, and this is their album, The Jester Race. So I got into In Flames, I guess, in middle school. I kind of heard more of the newer stuff, which is, you know, obviously a little more like metalcore and, you know, radio friendly and accessible and stuff like that. So I knew, you know, a lot of their stuff before I even checked this album out. But yeah, man, I picked this one up at the Rhythm section in Gatlinburg, Tennessee, which is a great record store if you're ever up there in Gatlinburg. Go check that store out. But anyway, so I picked this one up and I took it home, popped it in, and you know, the first couple listens, honestly, it was like it really just wasn't sticking. I guess it was just because, you know, I don't know. I guess it was just, you know, kind of song structures and stuff that I'd really never heard before, and it was probably the most, you know, extreme kind of thing that I'd heard, you know, up to that point. Songs like, you know, fucking Dead Eternity and December Flower are pretty fucking, you know, somebody that the heaviest thing they've heard is Slipknot. This is pretty fucking, you know, pretty fucking heavy. But anyway, so I just kept on listening to it and kept on listening to it, and then one day it just finally clicked. And ever since then, I've just absolutely fallen in love with this album. Yeah, this album is just super important for me as far as getting into extreme metal. You know, I love this album from beginning to end. It's probably a top 5 album for me of all time. Absolutely love it. But yeah, if you've not checked this one out, In Flames, Jester Race. It's awesome. Love it. So moving on, we're gonna cover another melodic death metal band, and this band I kind of got into after In Flames, and you know, this was kind of like, you know, of course they're still melodic death metal, but I think they're a hell of a lot more heavier than In Flames and a lot more brutal. That band being Marth, and this is their 2016 album, Yum's Viking. So this was the first Marth that I ever heard, and it really helped me get into the band, and it kind of helped me kind of progress to get in from, you know, the In Flames kind of melodeath, which is a lot more melodic, and this is a lot more just fucking focused on heaviness and brutalness, and like, you know, there's not a lot of like really just absolutely brutal melodic death metal bands. Like, just when you think of melodeath, you don't think of like really fucking heavy bands. But Marth is one of those that can do that to melodic death metal, or to the melodic death metal sound. But yeah, first one I heard, I picked this one up, popped it in, and loved it immediately. And, you know, from going from In Flames to this, you know, it just kept getting heavier and heavier and heavier from there. And so yeah, this album was just super important for me, along with, you know, and just Marth, period, along with In Flames, was just super important for me as far as getting into, you know, more extreme metal. Yeah, man, just awesome album. You know, it's obviously it's not my favorite. Their earlier stuff is I wouldn't say way better, but it's better. But yeah, check this one out if you haven't. You know, if you've kind of wrote off, you know, newer Marth. But yeah, this album's fucking awesome, and it's super important for me and has a lot of meaning. So yeah, Marth, Yum's Viking. So moving on, so like, you know, I kind of really got into like melodic death with those two bands. Then I got into like, you know, At the Gate, Slaughter of the Soul, and like Dark Tranquillity, you know, all those early Dark Tranquillity albums. And so I really got into melodic death. And I guess probably, the summer in between my freshman and sophomore year of high school, I bought the album Vile from Cannibal Corpse, and you know, of course I kind of dug it. You know, I wasn't like super into it, but like then I was like, you know what, let's give some of the earlier albums a try. And so yeah, I bought, you know, the first 3 or 4. No, I bought the first 3. I don't have the Bleeding, but I bought the first 3, and that's what I'm going to show you now. You know, Eaten Back to Life, Butchered at Birth, Tomb of the Mutilated, and if I had the Bleeding, I would show the Bleeding too. But yeah, these 3 albums, man, I mean, you know, they're the first death metal albums I really truly loved. It wasn't the first one I bought, you know, from Cannibal Corpse. It wasn't the first I heard, but it was the first Cannibal Corpse and first just death metal period, like I said, that I truly just absolutely loved. Yeah, man, you know, I really listened to these heavily that summer, and you know, strangely enough, you know, Summer Slaughter was coming through Knoxville that year, and Cannibal Corpse just happened to be headlining. So, you know, I was like, I really started getting into them now, and especially the first 4. But I really started listening to them a lot, and you know, just for the memories that gave me, just listening to those throughout that summer, man, was awesome. And you know, then of course I went and saw them. And if you went to Summer Slaughter 2016, you know that obviously Corpse played, but you know, it introduced me, you know, not only to them, you know, more of their songs, but I was introduced to Nile, Chrysian, Suffocation, Revocation, you know, Carnifex. You know, they're a deathcore, but still introduced to all those bands, and that would have never happened had I not listened, or had I not, you know, I guess if I hadn't bothered listening to the first, well, these 3 plus the Bleeding from Cannibal Corpse. It probably would have never gone to that show, because you know, when I bought Vile, of course I love Vile now, but I wasn't really a big fan of it when I first bought it. You know, it took me quite a few listens to get into Vile, but those 3 albums and the Bleeding, you know, that made me fall in love with Cannibal Corpse. Like I said, made me go to that show, and from that show I just absolutely fell in love with all death metal. And of course I got into all those bands that I talked about. And then, you know, discovered, like, you know, Deicide, Morbid Angel, Malevolent Creation, Death, you know, all the Obituary, Autopsy, you know. So without those albums, probably wouldn't be here today talking to you about, you know, how big of a death metal fan I am, you know. Of course, you know, as you can tell, Obituary. But anyway, so moving on. So we're through kind of how I got into, you know, at this point, you know, after I got into, you know, the mellow death and the death metal, I'm fully, like, you know, into extreme metal at this point. But there was, of course, you know, a whole sect of extreme metal that I had never really, you know, bothered to check out, and that was black metal. You know, mostly because I was kind of just intimidated to check it out. You know, it just seemed pretty abrasive, and it is really abrasive still to me to this day, but I love it now. But I would never be into black metal like I am now without, well, these 3 albums, and I'll show them to you in the order I've got them stacked. So, yeah, man, Nemesis Davina from Satyricon. I mean, you know, I remember I bought this album, I guess, so I'd probably been into extreme metal for about 2 years at that point. You know, I'd been into death metal for about a year and mellow death for 2 or 3, but, you know, I just decided one day, I was like, you know, I saw this, you know, a live video of Satyricon playing, and I was like, you know what, this is actually pretty cool. So I went, and again, I picked this one up at the rhythm section as well. But, you know, I absolutely loved it. I popped it in as soon as I got home, absolutely loved it. Well, got back to the room because we were vacationing in Gatlinburg at that time, but I popped it in, absolutely loved it. Probably listened to it like 3 times a day for the rest of the week we were there, and yeah, just absolutely love this album, man. Super, super important album for me as far as getting into black metal. I don't know that this was, well, okay, we'll get to that in a minute. This wasn't the first black metal I had heard, but this was definitely the first black metal album that I ever purchased. So yeah, for that reason alone, it's super meaningful to me, and this was the album that really got me into black metal. So yeah, Satyricon, Nemesis Davina. So yeah, moving on. So this next album is, of course I really got into Satyricon, and really didn't check anything out though past Satyricon until one day I was in FYE at the mall in Knoxville, Westtown Mall, and I went into the FYE and I was just kind of looking through the albums, and I saw the album I'm about to show, and I was kind of like, well, that's kind of strange for an album like this to be in FYE, so I decided to just pick it up for the novelty of the fact that it was in FYE, and that album is Transylvanian Hunger from Darkthrone. And of course, I popped it in, like many of these albums, and absolutely fell in love with it from the first time I ever heard it. And this album kind of became, the standard for me as far as, what I wanted black metal to sound like. I mean, I absolutely love this album. The atmosphere on this album is just fucking amazing. Along with the Satyricon discography, this album was another one that's just instrumental, and this album really made me fall in love with black metal as a whole, not just the black metal Satyricon was putting out. So, yeah, man, and then of course I got into all the early Darkthrone stuff, and from there, Burzum, Immortal, what have you. But yeah, Transylvanian Hunger. Speaking of Immortal, the last album I want to talk about that has a lot of meaning to me is Immortal, Sons of Northern Darkness, because it was the first Immortal that I ever heard, and it actually, I think, One by One was probably, of course, I heard like these other two full lengths before I heard this album as a whole, but I think One by One was like the first like blackish metal song that I really ever heard. Yeah, man, just completely love this album. This is one of my favorite Immortal. I don't know if it's my favorite between this and Pure Holocaust, but I can go back and forth really. But yeah, man, just another one of those albums that just was super important for me getting into black metal. It had a little bit more of a little more accessible sound than the other two. It's got a little bit more thrash in it. But yeah, I mean, just absolutely love this one. Super important for me, just like all those other ones. The other two, with getting me really into black metal. Fell in love with Immortal because of this. Yeah, just super important album for me. Immortal, Sons of Northern Darkness. So yeah, that wraps it up. Those are really the albums that first got me into extreme metal, and then the albums that got me into death metal, and then the albums that got me into black metal, and that's the reason why I decided to talk about them in this video, is because they have a lot of meaning, and without the albums I just showed today, I probably wouldn't be into the music I am now, or be sitting in front of you talking about, extreme metal like I am now. But yeah, man, just if there's any of those you've never checked out, I highly recommend it. It really helped me. Put it this way: if you're wanting to get into extreme metal, and you don't know where to start, maybe maybe start with some of the albums I showed in this video. Maybe start with start with these two, or some sort of melodic death metal, and maybe that'll help you get into it. But anyway, I'm starting to ramble now, so I'm gonna wrap this video up. Yeah, if you like what you see, subscribe. Do whatever you want to do. Comment. Let's start a discussion. What are your most meaningful albums? But yeah, got a lot more coming on the way for you guys. Yeah, stay tuned and take care, guys.